So then I started looking around at the classrooms in which we were teaching in, classrooms like this. And I thought, if students learn what they do, like classic Dewey, educational perspective here, what are they learning sitting here? What are they actually learning as they sit in these classrooms? So if these walls could talk, what would they say? And so then we actually did this with the students. I had them kind of look around the room and help me brainstorm, what is the message of this classroom? What is this classroom telling you about education? And the first thing was that it is that to learn is to acquire information. And so there's nothing else about this room. This room clearly doesn't say that to learn is to discuss information or to critique information or anything like that. It's clearly about acquiring information. The whole room is designed as an information dump where the professor comes to the front of the room and dumps information on the students. The second thing then is that information is scarce and hard to find. That's why we need these special rooms where you can put the expert in front of the room and dump the information out. And maybe this might have made sense in the past, but it doesn't today. The third thing is to trust authority for good information. So the expert at the front of the room is the authority, and that you should trust that authority for good information. The fourth thing is that authorized information is beyond discussion. And the way the room says this is that these chairs, I think, actually swivel a little bit. So maybe these could be good for discussion. Maybe you could at least turn to your neighbor. But these are clearly fixed chairs facing the front of the room. The whole room is designed simply for this information dump, not for discussion. So then you can sort of summarize this as saying it's all about obey the authority and follow along. But there's something worse about this, and that is that students take these same expectations to those wonderful small classrooms that every once in a while we get to teach, where we have, under 20 students, and it's perfect for discussion and this kind of thing. And yet you find, or at least I find, that students are often bringing the expectations of the big classroom into the small classroom, and I get a bunch of students who still don't want to discuss, who maybe don't even have, they haven't really learned how to ask the types of questions that are good for discussion, and this has been a real problem. And the bigger problem here is I started paying attention to what students are saying inside these walls, and I pay really close attention to questions, because I think questions are sort of the catalyst for great learning. And if you have if you have the right question, you really set your students out to learn and learn and learn. They can just go on this great quest if they have the right question. But unfortunately, types of questions asked in these walls are things like, how many points is this worth? And you guys are all familiar with these types of questions. How long does this paper need to be? And my least favorite of all, what do we need to know for this test? Because it actually is saying, I'm only going to learn so much, okay? So just tell me what I need to know, and then the learning sort of stops there. And of course they forget it the next day. So this is what I call the crisis of significance. Students are not finding any meaning in their education beyond just getting a grade, and that is very problematic. So somehow we need to get beyond that. So then there's something in the air here that's actually changed everything, and it's just in the last 5 years. And this is where all the assumptions that you see built into the room start to be subverted. And that something in the air is a simple fact that most campuses are now Wi-Fi enabled and so on. So while we are quizzing these students on their multiple choice exams, the reality is that they could just pull out their phones and find any answer that's on that exam. The reality is that the vast majority of human knowledge is actually floating in the air all around us right now. And a better skill might actually be finding a way to harness that information, critique it, and maybe create something new out of it. Those are the types of skills that could be really powerful, not just simple rote memorization. Memorization actually has a role in education, an important role, but we need to move somewhere beyond this. So I wanted to just sort of step by step break down all of these assumptions and show you what it means when the reality is that the World Wide Web is literally all around us right now. What does it do to these assumptions? And the first thing is the idea that information is scarce is, of course, completely blown out, because we're going to produce 70 exabytes of information just this year, which is 70 billion gigabytes, which is more than the entire collection of the Library of Congress. In fact, it's a lot more. It's 518,000 libraries worth. And that's just in terms of what we will produce just this year. So this idea of information being scarce is gone, and we knew that 40 years ago. Marshall McLuhan's been saying that for a long time. So that's out. And if you do the math, it comes out to 12,000 gigabytes per person that will be produced. That's the equivalent of a stack of books 350 feet tall. Less than 0.01% of this will be on paper, and that's really important because digital information is different than information on paper, and we need to start thinking about how it's different and what it means for education. Therefore, we need to rethink information learning and education. So here's a quote from Marshall McLuhan. This is the famous rearview mirror quote. He says, "We look at the present through a rearview mirror, we march backwards into the future." And here's just an example here. You think about being on the so-called information superhighway, which is itself a metaphor. And we're looking in the way that we encounter this new information environment is actually through a very deep metaphor through the past, through print technology, so that we actually have a desktop through which we encounter this. We put our files inside folders, and this is the way we organize information. And we're only just now starting to recognize that putting things in files and inside folders, it may not be the best way to organize digital information, that there are now new possibilities for the organization of information, and especially new possibilities when you consider that we are all networked together. And when we start sharing the information we have about organization, the whole thing starts to turn upside down. So we're really just now starting to see what we can do with digital technology and getting beyond this metaphor. And I can just go through just a few examples here. If you think about our assumptions about information in the past, a lot of it was based as information on paper. So on paper we thought of information as a thing with a material form. You could point to it, and librarians and other people were really engaged in this activity, which is putting it in its logical place in a specific hierarchy of categories. So each information object actually had a specific place in this hierarchy. And then when we have the World Wide Web come around, Yahoo actually continues this tradition, so that the first web catalog, being Yahoo 1995 and then on into 1996, they actually put each website within a specific category. Even though that website could have existed in multiple categories, because electronic information is not this type of physical object, they tended to put it just in one specific category. Then hyperlinking started to show us something new, and we're still sort of unpacking the power of the hyperlink. We still don't quite understand all the things that it can do. But the one thing it showed us early on is that information can be in more than one place at one time. And then Google started harnessing these links and showed us that we might not need the hierarchies. So that now today, most people don't even start with like any sort of categorization scheme. When we start our research, we usually start with a search. And that has really changed the way we do research. And then that was 1998 when Google started coming out. Blogger starts to come around 99, 2000, 2001, becomes really popular in 2003. And it shows us that anybody can be a creator of information. And this really starts to flip the scales here. So that today there's 112.8 million blogs, and if you're keeping track, that's almost 112.8 million more than there were in 2003. Because it just was like almost not around in 2003, and now blogs are everywhere, and that's just in the last 5 years. And it's the same thing with TV and video. If you think back to 1948, in 1948, this is the date that ABC started broadcasting. They became the third major network in the United States to broadcast. So since that time, that's 1948, that's 60 years, and if you have 3 networks, and if you give them the benefit of the doubt and you say for those 60 years they've been broadcasting 365 days for 24 hours each and every day, that would be over 1.5 million hours of programming, which is a lot. And when Marshall McLuhan said we live in an information age, he was talking about this. But YouTube has produced more in the past 6 months, and they did it without producers.